In a world full of challenges and hardships, the story of Sophia and David is a testament to the power of true love. This is not just a journey of overcoming adversity, but also one of self-discovery, respect, and unconditional love. Join us in following this inspiring tale, where love is not just sacrifice, but a worthy fight to find true happiness. David, a man with wealth beyond measure and success admired by many, had spent countless hours imagining this moment. Tonight, he would ask Rachel, the woman he loved, to marry him. Despite all his accomplishments, he knew his life felt incomplete without her. With every detail prepared, he chose the perfect setting, a quiet, secluded spot under the warm lights of the park. David wanted this to be special, an unforgettable beginning to their life together. As the golden light bathed them, David took a deep breath and dropped to one knee, pulling out the velvet box that held the diamond ring he had so carefully chosen. He looked up at Rachel, her face illuminated, her beauty only magnified by the tenderness in his gaze. "Rachel," he whispered, voice trembling with hope and nerves, "I love you. Will you marry me?" In that moment, he expected everything: a tearful smile, a breathless yes, maybe even a joyful laugh. But none of those things came. Instead, Rachel's expression changed. A shadow passed over her eyes, her lips pressing into a hesitant line. She took a step back, and David's heart sank. "David," she began softly, as if each word weighed heavily. "I can't." David stared, confused, his world beginning to tilt off its axis. She continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't marry someone who's never really there. You're distant, David. Your heart is somewhere else, in your work, in your responsibilities. I can't build a life with someone who's never home. I'm sorry." Her words hit him like a wave, washing over him, chilling him to the bone. For a moment, he was frozen, the ring he held feeling cold and empty in his hand. The woman he loved was slipping away, each word pushing her further from him. He watched, helpless, as Rachel turned and walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoing into the silence. It was over in seconds, yet he felt the ache of it sink deeper, spreading through him, a reminder of the future he had lost in an instant. In the shadows nearby, a young woman named Sophia watched the entire scene. She was a homeless girl, her clothes worn and thin against the chill of the night. For someone who had known hardship all her life, she had developed a resilience that kept her standing through the worst of times. But as she observed David's heartbreak, something shifted inside her. Despite his wealth and status, here he was, alone and abandoned, facing the same kind of loneliness she knew too well. Earlier that evening, Sophia had crossed paths with David when he had offered her a bit of help, some food and a few dollars for a night at a hostel. He had even given her an old ring, a kind gesture, an attempt to offer her a small comfort. But Sophia had refused. To her, the ring felt like pity, a reminder of her own helplessness, a thing to be rejected, even if it meant spending the night cold and hungry. Yet now, seeing David with his own heart breaking, she found herself unable to look away. He was no longer the wealthy man who had tried to extend a charity. In his silence, in his pain, he was just a person who had loved and lost. She reached into her pocket, feeling the ring he had given her, a small object that now felt strangely significant. Watching David, she realized that the ring wasn't just a token of pity. It was something more, a link between two strangers who shared a loneliness that transcended wealth or status. Sophia felt an urge to approach him, to return the ring, not out of pride, but as a sign of something deeper, an unspoken understanding that connected them both. Days passed after that heartbreaking night, but David couldn't shake the lingering sadness. His world, once filled with success and admiration, now felt hollow. He tried to bury himself in work, in lavish dinners and social events, but everything seemed to remind him of Rachel's parting words. Nothing he had, no amount of money, status, or influence, could heal the wound of her rejection. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, David found himself back in the same park, drawn by some invisible force to the place where his life had suddenly unraveled. He walked along the path, his gaze lowered, lost in thought. It was there that he saw her, Sophia, the young homeless woman he had met before. She sat on a bench, wrapped in a thin, worn jacket, her eyes tired but defiant. This time, she wasn't hiding in the shadows. She looked up, and their eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, a silent understanding. And as David approached, she didn't look away. "I see you're back," she said with a faint smile, her voice laced with both resilience and weariness. David nodded, feeling a strange urge to talk, to open up in a way he rarely did. He hadn't told anyone about what had happened with Rachel, but something in Sophia's eyes, familiar and yet unfathomable, made him feel safe enough to share his story, if only just a little. "I thought I'd be spending the rest of my life with someone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Turns out, she didn't feel the same. Sophia studied him for a moment, then shrugged slightly, as if to say, "Life doesn't always go as planned." She sighed, a distant sadness flickering in her gaze. "You think that's hard? Try getting rejected every single day. People look at me, and they don't see a person. They see someone to avoid, someone not worth their time." Her voice, though soft, held a fierce, unwavering strength. "I fight every day just to survive. Every meal, every night is a struggle. I go through it all because I have someone I care about, my mother. She's all I have left, and even if it means begging or going hungry, I'll do it for her." David listened, captivated, as Sophia continued, her words piercing through the veil of his own pain. She spoke of nights spent sleeping on cold benches, of mornings waking up with an empty stomach and no clear path ahead. She spoke of the shame of rejection, of being turned away from shelters, of facing the harsh looks from strangers who saw her as nothing more than a burden. But despite it all, there was a spark of fire in her voice, a determination to keep going, to keep fighting. "Why do you keep going?" he asked, genuinely curious. Sophia's eyes softened, and she looked away as if searching for the right words. "Because I have to," she said quietly. "Because if I give up, then all of this, all the struggle, the pain, will be for nothing. My mother needs me, even if the world doesn't. She's sick, but she's the only family I have left. I can't give up on her, no matter how hard it gets." David felt a lump rise in his throat. Her words cut deeper than he'd expected, resonating in a way he couldn't quite explain. Here was someone who had every reason to give up, every reason to feel defeated, and yet she was fighting with every ounce of strength she had. Suddenly, his own heartbreak felt small in comparison. "Why shouldn't you fight for what you love?" she asked, her voice soft but unwavering. "I'm just a girl on the streets, and I'm out here fighting every day. If I can do that for someone I love, why shouldn't you fight for yours? If Rachel's what you really want, then go after her. Don't just let her go." David was silent, absorbing her words, realizing the truth in them. He felt both humbled and inspired by this young woman, who, despite her struggles, still believed in the worth of fighting for love. But there was something else there, a vulnerability he could sense, a weariness that even her fierce spirit couldn't entirely hide. He felt a pang of guilt for all the times he had overlooked people like her, too absorbed in his own world to notice their stories. Without saying a word, he stood up and extended his hand. "Let's get something to eat," he said, his tone gentle but insistent. Sophia hesitated, her eyes widening in surprise, as if no one had ever offered her such simple kindness without expecting something in return. She glanced at his hand, unsure, but something in his gaze made her nod, and she took his hand, letting him guide her to a small diner nearby. As they sat together over a warm meal, the conversation between them continued. David listened as Sophia shared pieces of her life, the dreams she once had, the life she never got to live. And for the first time in a long while, David felt something inside him shift, the numbness of his own pain melting away. He wasn't just hearing words. He was witnessing a strength he had never truly understood until now. And as Sophia took her first bite, a glimmer of relief crossing her face, David found himself smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile. In that simple moment, the boundaries between them faded, and they were just two souls, scarred but somehow healing, bound by the common thread of shared vulnerability. Neither of them could have known it yet, but this chance meeting, this quiet moment shared over a simple meal, would be the beginning of something that would change them both forever. The small diner was warm, the kind of warmth that seeped into your skin and settled the chill in your bones. Sophia sat across from David, watching as he ordered enough food to fill the table between them. The last time she'd eaten a proper meal felt like a distant memory, and even though hunger gnawed at her, a part of her hesitated. This was unfamiliar territory, sitting across from a man like David, a man of wealth and privilege, yet here he was. breaking bread with her as if there were no difference between them. David noticed her hesitation and gently nudged a plate toward her. "Eat," he said softly, a small smile on his lips. No strings attached. Sophia looked at the plate in front of her, the steam rising from the food filling the air with the rich scent of spices and warmth. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up her fork, half expecting him to retract his offer, to remind her she didn't belong here. But David didn't. He simply began eating as though this were the most natural thing in the world. The first bite was a revelation, warm and comforting, filling an emptiness in her that went far beyond hunger. She glanced up at David, expecting a look of pity or amusement, but his gaze held something entirely different: respect. There was no trace of judgment, no sign that he saw her as anything other than an equal. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Sophia felt seen, not as a problem or a burden, but as a person. They ate in comfortable silence at first, but as the meal went on, conversation began to flow, soft and genuine. David asked her questions, not about her hardships, but about her dreams, her interests, the life she might have had if things had been different. At first, she was guarded, her answers brief and cautious. But David's warmth, his gentle curiosity, started to dissolve the walls she had so carefully built. It was as if each question, each simple smile, chipped away at the defenses she had relied on to survive. In between bites, Sophia shared fragments of her past. She spoke of her love for reading, how she used to lose herself in books back when life was simpler. She told him about her mother, her pride in Sophia's resilience, her voice always warm and encouraging despite her illness. David listened intently, not with the distant politeness she had come to expect from people who didn't really care, but with an attention that made her feel as if her story mattered. Every nod, every soft, "I understand," reassured her, and she found herself telling him more than she'd ever told anyone. At some point, David reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills, and slid them across the table. "This should be enough for a night at the hostel," he said gently, "and for a few new clothes, too. You deserve a bit of comfort, at least for tonight." Sophia stared at the money, her immediate instinct to refuse flickering in her eyes. But this time, she didn't pull away. David's offer didn't feel like pity. It felt like genuine kindness, the kind of gesture one friend might make to another. She realized that David didn't see her as just a homeless girl. He saw her as Sophia, a person with hopes and struggles, a person deserving of dignity and care. Her hand reached out, hesitating for a moment, but eventually she accepted the money, her fingers grazing his briefly. The warmth of his touch lingered, gentle and reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost too soft to hear. Gratitude filled her, swelling and warming her from the inside out, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. They continued their conversation, sharing quiet laughter and small smiles. Sophia found herself talking about little things she hadn't thought mattered: the sound of rain, the comfort of an old book, the feeling of sunlight on her face. And David, in turn, spoke of moments that had brought him joy and peace, his voice colored with nostalgia and a hint of melancholy. They were two strangers from vastly different worlds, but in that diner, sharing food and stories, they became something else: companions, allies, perhaps even friends. As they finished their meal, David reached across the table and handed her a slip of paper with his phone number. "If you ever need anything, Sophia, don't hesitate to reach out. I mean it." Her fingers closed around the paper, her heart pounding with a mix of emotions she couldn't name. No one had ever offered her a way back, a lifeline. No one had treated her as though she were worth saving. In David's eyes, she saw a kindness she had long stopped believing in, and it was almost enough to make her believe in herself again. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, a sense of hope, fragile but real. As they left the diner, Sophia turned back to glance at him one last time. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she had found something she hadn't known she needed. Not just food or money, but a reminder of her own worth, a sense that she mattered. And as she walked away into the night, clutching the slip of paper and the money, she felt something new, a warmth that lingered, a memory she would carry with her, a kindness that had made her believe, if only for a moment, that there was still good in the world. As David walked back to his empty apartment, the echoes of his conversation with Sophia replayed in his mind, lingering like a melody he couldn't forget. Her resilience, her quiet strength, and the way she fought for what mattered in her life. All of it left an impression he hadn't expected. Here was someone who had every reason to feel defeated, yet she faced each day with a courage he could barely fathom. And it was in her courage that he began to see his own life in a new light. For too long, David had clung to memories of Rachel, holding on to what was no longer there. He had loved her, yes, but his love had become a prison, trapping him in a cycle of waiting and wishing for a future that would never come. He realized now that he had been more in love with the idea of her than with the woman she had become. Rachel had walked away, and while the pain of that still lingered, he could no longer deny the truth. Holding on to her was like grasping at air. She was a part of his past, a chapter that had closed, and it was time he turned the page. Sitting alone in his living room, the city lights casting a soft glow across his apartment, David made a decision. He was done waiting. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity, a freedom that came with letting go. He wouldn't spend another day yearning for something that had slipped through his fingers. Instead, he would step forward, not just for himself, but for the life he could create, a life not burdened by the weight of lost love, but enriched by new possibilities. The thought of Sophia crossed his mind, her laughter, her kindness, her strength. She had sparked something within him, a reminder of the kind of person he wanted to be, the kind of life he wanted to live. And so, with a newfound resolve, David decided he would make a gesture, not of romance, but of friendship, of hope. He wanted to show her, and perhaps himself, that life didn't have to be defined by past mistakes or heartbreak. David picked up his phone and ordered a dress, something elegant and timeless, imagining the way Sophia might feel wearing something beautiful, something just for her. He wanted to give her a glimpse of the life she deserved, a life filled with moments of grace and kindness. He also called his favorite restaurant and made a reservation, picturing them both sitting across a table once more, sharing food and conversation under soft, warm lights. It was a simple plan, but it was a beginning, a step into something new. As he prepared for the evening, David felt a strange sense of anticipation, a mixture of excitement and peace. He no longer felt the weight of his past love dragging him down. Instead, he felt uplifted by the prospect of opening his heart to new experiences, to new people who might walk into his life. Tonight would be a celebration, not of a romance rekindled, but of a new chapter begun. He was ready to show himself and the world that he was moving forward. Dressed and ready, David glanced at himself in the mirror, seeing a man not defined by his wealth or success, but by the decisions he was finally brave enough to make. Tonight, he would honor the journey he was on, not the past he had left behind. And as he left his apartment, he felt a lightness in his steps, a certainty that he was, at last, on the path towards something real and true. With the dress neatly wrapped in a gift bag and the reservation set, David walked out into the night, feeling a quiet thrill as he thought of the evening ahead. He didn't know what lay beyond this moment, but for the first time, he didn't need to know. He was ready to live for the present, ready to open his heart to whatever came next. And as he walked, he felt a sense of joy, a sense of peace, knowing he was finally free to begin again. Sophia stood before the mirror, hardly able to recognize the woman staring back at her. The hotel room David had reserved for her was modest yet elegant, and its warm lighting cast a soft glow across her transformed reflection. She ran her fingers along the fabric of the dress David had given her, a rich, midnight blue gown that hugged her in all the right places, flowing gracefully down to her ankles. Her hair, once tangled and unkempt, now cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders, framing her face in a way that seemed almost unreal. She felt like she was seeing a stranger, someone she hadn't known existed within her. The makeup artist and stylist David had hired had worked magic, bringing out a radiance she had never seen in herself. Sophia touched her cheek, feeling the smoothness of her skin, the hint of color on her lips, the way her eyes looked brighter, more alive. It was as if she had been given a glimpse of the person she could have been, the life she might have led, if circumstances had been different. For a moment, the weight of the past slipped away, leaving her feeling lighter, freer, A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Heart pounding, she opened it to find David standing there, waiting, his gaze soft but intense. The moment he saw her, his expression shifted, his eyes widening in genuine awe. He was, for a second, speechless. David, a man who was always so composed, so sure of himself, looked as though he had forgotten how to form words. And then, finally, he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "You look beautiful, Sophia. Truly beautiful." The words, simple as they were, struck her deeply. Sophia had spent so long being invisible, blending into the shadows of the world, feeling like an afterthought to everyone she encountered. But the way David looked at her now, with such admiration and warmth, made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of worth, of value. His gaze wasn't one of pity or charity. It was one of genuine admiration, as if he saw her for who she truly was, beyond her struggles, beyond her hardships. A soft blush colored her cheeks as she looked down, not used to such attention, especially from someone like David. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She dared to glance up at him again, and the way he continued to look at her, his eyes unwavering, made her heart race. There was something in his gaze, a warmth that felt almost like desire. It was subtle, unspoken, but undeniably there, simmering just beneath the surface. As they left together, heading to the restaurant he had reserved, David offered her his arm. She hesitated for a heartbeat before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the strength and warmth of his presence beside her. With every step, the reality of this night became more surreal. She was no longer just a girl from the streets. Tonight, she felt like she was part of something grand, something she had only ever glimpsed from a distance. When they arrived at the restaurant, heads turned, eyes lingering on the striking pair that had just entered. The elegant setting, the soft music, the gentle clinking of glasses. It all felt like a world she had once dreamed of but never dared to believe could be hers, even for an evening. David led her to their table, pulling out her chair with a quiet grace that made her heart flutter. Every gesture, every look was filled with a kind of care that felt almost intimate. As they settled into conversation, David was as attentive as ever, his eyes never straying far from her face. He asked her about her dreams, her passions, her life beyond the hardships she had endured. For the first time, Sophia felt free to speak about her hopes and desires, things she had buried long ago. She talked about her love for art, how she once dreamed of studying, of creating something beautiful with her own hands. David listened, his gaze never faltering, as if her every word mattered. Between laughter and shared smiles, there was a spark in the air, an unspoken chemistry that grew with each passing moment. They laughed together, sharing stories and experiences, and with each laugh, Sophia felt herself letting go a little more. She found herself leaning forward, her hand brushing his on the table, lingering a bit longer each time. There was a warmth between them, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. David's compliments were never forced, never superficial. He spoke to her as if she were an equal, as if he truly saw her. And with every kind word, every genuine smile, she felt a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't just a girl on the streets. She was Sophia, a woman with dreams, with beauty, with a heart that still dared to hope. By the time dessert arrived, they were both lost in the magic of the evening. David reached across the table, taking her hand in his touch warm and gentle. Sophia looked down at their intertwined fingers, a soft smile playing on her lips. She felt a tremor of excitement, of longing, and she could tell by the way he held her hand that he felt it too. They didn't need to speak it. The silence between them was enough. As they left the restaurant, walking through the quiet, moonlit streets, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt in years, a glimmer of happiness, of possibility. David walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring, as though he would protect her from the world if he could. And with every step, with every glance, Sophia began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, this night was the beginning of something real. In that moment, she didn't care about the future, didn't worry about what tomorrow might bring. Tonight, she was simply a woman, walking beside a man who saw her, who valued her, who made her feel like she belonged. And as they walked, their hands brushing against each other, Sophia knew one thing for certain. Tonight, she was truly alive, and she was no longer invisible. The night air was cool and crisp as David and Sophia entered the grand ballroom, arm in arm. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm, inviting glow over the elegantly dressed guests who filled the room. As they stepped through the doors, heads turned. David, as always, exuded a quiet confidence. But tonight, he had a spark in his eyes that caught even his closest friends off guard. Beside him was Sophia, a vision in the midnight blue gown that clung gracefully to her frame, her poise and beauty captivating everyone's attention. The murmurs began as soon as they entered. People exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. They knew David, successful, charming, but guarded, a man who had never been one for public displays or indulgent social gatherings. Tonight, though, there was a softness to him, a warmth that had been missing in his usual reserved demeanor. And it was clear to everyone that the source of that warmth was the young woman by his side. Sophia held her breath as they moved through the crowd, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. She was used to being invisible, to slipping through the world unseen, but tonight she felt like she was stepping into the light, seen and admired. With every step, she grew more confident, bolstered by the way David's hand held hers with gentle assurance. He introduced her to his friends and colleagues, each introduction a declaration of her presence in his life. They looked at her with polite curiosity, and while some smiles were genuine, others carried a hint of surprise, even disbelief. But David, unfazed by the whispers, kept his focus solely on Sophia, his smile never wavering. Just then, across the room, Sophia saw Rachel. She was radiant in her own right, her beauty polished and unmistakable, the kind of woman who commanded attention wherever she went. Her gaze fell upon Sophia, and her smile faded, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized the dress. The midnight blue gown that now adorned Sophia had once been hers, a detail that spoke volumes without a word being said. Rachel's brows knitted together in disbelief, her posture stiffening as she took in the scene before her. Rachel glided toward them, her gaze sharp as she reached David's side. "David," she said, her voice smooth but edged with tension, "I see you've found someone new." Her eyes flicked toward Sophia, a hint of something disdainful lurking behind her polite smile. "And you gave her my dress?" David looked at her calmly, his expression unreadable but firm. "It's not your dress anymore, Rachel. You walked away." His tone was gentle but unwavering, and as he looked back at Sophia, his eyes softened in a way that made his intentions clear. "I wanted her to feel as beautiful as she deserves to feel." The quiet resolve in his words caught Rachel off guard. She stared at him, momentarily speechless, as if she were seeing him for the first time. The David she had known would never have spoken with such certainty, such independence. He had always been the one waiting, hoping, clinging to the memories they had shared. But now, that man seemed like a distant memory, replaced by someone who had finally chosen to step forward. Sophia felt the tension radiating between them, but David's unwavering focus on her made her feel safe, protected, like she belonged at his side. Rachel, realizing she was no longer the center of his world, hesitated before offering a tight, dismissive smile. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, a reminder of the chapter David had finally closed. Relieved, Sophia took a deep breath, and David squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Forget her," he murmured, his voice soft but firm. "Tonight is about us." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, filling her with a renewed sense of confidence. As the music swelled, David led Sophia onto the dance floor, guiding her into a slow, graceful waltz. The world seemed to fade away as they moved together, her hand resting in his, their steps perfectly in sync. For Sophia, the moment felt like a dream. She could feel his warmth, his strength, his gentleness as he held her, and with each step, she found herself melting into his embrace, her worries and insecurities dissolving. They swayed to the rhythm, the music carrying them, and for the first time, Sophia felt truly alive. She had never imagined herself here, dancing with a man who looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. The way he held her, the way his eyes lingered on hers, told her everything he hadn't yet put into words. There was a tenderness, an unspoken promise in his gaze, a spark that went beyond simple attraction. It was as if he saw through the walls she had built, into the depths of her heart. David's laughter rang out as they twirled across the floor, a sound so genuine and full of joy that it made her heart skip. His hand rested on her back, guiding her, his touch a blend of firmness and care that made her feel cherished, valued. With every turn, with every shared smile, the bond between them deepened, and the shadows of the past receded. David felt it too. The weight he had carried, the lingering hurt from Rachel, was finally lifting, replaced by a new sense of freedom and possibility. Their dance became a language of its own, one that didn't require words or explanations. In his arms, Sophia found a peace she hadn't known in years, a feeling of being safe, of being seen. And David, for the first time, felt the joy of being truly present, of letting go of what had been and embracing what could be. As the song came to an end, they found themselves standing close, their breaths mingling, their faces inches apart. David's hand lingered on her waist, and his gaze held hers, filled with an emotion he couldn't quite put into words. In that moment, they both knew that something had shifted, that this wasn't just a dance. It was the beginning of something real, something they had both been searching for, even if they hadn't known it. Around them, the ballroom came back into focus, the chatter and laughter of the other guests filtering back into their awareness. But neither David nor Sophia paid it any mind. They stood there, lost in each other, the world around them fading into the background. This night, this moment, was theirs alone. David took her hand once more, guiding her off the dance floor, and as they stepped into the quiet of the terrace, under the soft glow of the stars, he looked at her, his expression filled with a quiet, undeniable affection. Sophia's heart raced as she held his gaze, feeling a warmth that made her want to believe in the possibilities of tomorrow, in the hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth holding on to. In the silence of the night, their unspoken feelings lingered, waiting to be discovered. And as they stood there, side by side, both David and Sophia knew that this was just the beginning of a journey neither of them had expected, but were now, perhaps, finally ready to embrace. The night air was heavy with tension as Rachel stood before David, her eyes blazing with frustration. The social event had ended, but the unresolved emotions lingered, thick in the air. She had been watching from afar, observing the growing closeness between him and Sophia, and the jealousy that had once simmered beneath her calm facade now bubbled to the surface. David was no longer the man she had once known, desperate, willing to wait for her, to put up with her lack of commitment. No, tonight he had been entirely different, focused solely on Sophia, as if she were the only woman in the room. The way he looked at her, the way he smiled, it was something Rachel hadn't seen in him in a long time. And that stung deeper than she could have imagined. She had expected him to run after her, to beg for her forgiveness, as he always had. But instead, he had turned away, his attention fixed on the woman who was so different from her, someone who didn't belong in his world, or so Rachel had believed. But now, it was becoming painfully clear that Sophia was not just a fleeting distraction. David, standing across from her now, seemed almost like a stranger. His expression was unreadable, but the shift in his demeanor was unmistakable. Rachel's heart tightened with a mix of disbelief and anger. She couldn't let him slip away so easily, not after all they had shared. "David," Rachel said, her voice laced with a sharp edge, "what is this? What's going on between you and her?" Her gaze flickered toward the terrace where Sophia had just disappeared, her presence still lingering in the shadows. "You're choosing her over me, aren't you?" David didn't flinch at her question, though the weight of her words settled heavily between them. He had long known this moment would come, the moment Rachel would confront him, demand to know where he stood. But what surprised him was the sense of finality he felt now. There was no hesitation in his heart. "I'm not choosing anyone, Rachel," David said quietly, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'm not waiting for you anymore. I've been holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." Rachel's face tightened, her lips curling into a faint, bitter smile. "So this is how it's going to be? You're going to throw away everything we had for some girl who's not even from your world?" She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the empty space between them. "Do you really think she's the one? She's just a homeless girl, David. She doesn't belong in your life. She doesn't belong in your world." David's jaw tightened at her words, but he remained composed, refusing to let her words shake his resolve. Sophia is a woman who's been through more than you'll ever know, Rachel. And she's been stronger than you've ever given her credit for. She's not just some passing fantasy. She's real. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her heart sinking at his words. The truth in them stung, cutting deeper than any argument they had ever had. But her pride wouldn't allow her to show vulnerability, so she pressed on. "Fine," she said, her voice cold now, a sharp edge of finality in her tone. "You want her so badly? Then go ahead, but don't come crying back to me when she lets you down. Don't say I didn't warn you. You're making a huge mistake, David." Without waiting for a response, Rachel turned on her heel and stormed off, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors as she disappeared into the crowd. David stood there, watching her go, his heart heavy but resolute. He had made his decision, and he wouldn't let Rachel's words shake him. Not anymore. But as soon as she was gone, a deep unease settled over him. The air seemed thicker, colder. His thoughts turned inward, as they often did when doubt crept in. Was he doing the right thing? Was he truly ready to step forward with Sophia, or was he simply running from the past? He had been so sure when Rachel had walked away, so certain that he was ready to embrace something new, something real. But now, without her presence to distract him, those old fears and uncertainties began to gnaw at him. Sophia's face flashed in his mind. Her smile, her warmth, the way she had made him feel seen. No one had ever made him feel that way before. He had grown up in a world of wealth and expectation, a world where appearances mattered more than anything else. But with her, he felt something different, something real. And yet, part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world that wasn't his, that he was walking a path he wasn't sure he was ready for. Sophia was strong, she was kind, but she was also fragile in ways he hadn't fully realized. She had spent her life being overlooked, rejected, and ignored. And now, when she was finally given the chance to shine, when she was finally seen, was it enough for her to believe that she truly belonged in his world? David sighed, rubbing his temples. He needed to see her, to talk to her, to know what she was thinking. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to lose her, just as he had lost Rachel. Only this time, it would be because of his own doubts. Meanwhile, across the room, Sophia stood by herself, watching the scene unfold from a distance. She had seen Rachel confront David, had heard the bitterness in her words, and it had unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, and for a moment, she felt small again, like the girl she used to be, standing on the sidelines of a world that didn't belong to her. The doubts began to creep in, just like they always did. She had been used to rejection, to never feeling like she fit in, to never feeling worthy of someone's love. She had never expected to be in David's life, let alone by his side. Was she really what he wanted? Or was she just a temporary distraction, something to fill the void left by Rachel's absence? Did he see her as an equal, or was he just offering her his charity, his kindness, because he felt sorry for her? Sophia swallowed hard, trying to push the doubts away, but they clung to her like shadows. She couldn't help but wonder if she truly belonged in his world. Did he really care for her, or was this just another fleeting moment that would fade once the novelty wore off? Her mind raced, her heart torn between hope and fear. Could she trust what she felt for him? Could she trust what he felt for her? Or was this just another dream she would wake up from, left with nothing but the remnants of a hope she had dared to believe in? In that moment, she knew she needed to speak to David, to hear from him what she was too afraid to ask. She needed to know if he truly meant what he had said, or if it was all just part of a story she had built up in her mind. But deep down, Sophia feared that the answer would be the one thing she didn't want to hear. The night had already been filled with tension, but what happened next would tip the scales. And for the first time, Sophia would truly see David for who he was, someone who would not bend under pressure, someone who would protect her from forces beyond her control. Rachel's anger, already simmering, reached a boiling point when she saw the connection between David and Sophia growing stronger by the minute. She couldn't stand it. She wouldn't accept being replaced. Not for someone like Sophia, someone she considered beneath her. It was a dangerous mix of pride and desperation that pushed her to confront the situation head-on. After the event, she found Sophia standing alone near the quiet courtyard, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the garden lights. Rachel approached with an air of feigned calmness, her smile cold and calculated. She had learned from years of getting what she wanted, how to manipulate, how to make people think they had no other choice but to follow her lead. Sophia stood there, unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. She had been lost in thought, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, trying to decipher David's true feelings and her own conflicting emotions. But the sound of Rachel's voice cut through her thoughts like a sharp blade. "Sophia," Rachel said, her voice laced with sweetness, though it was thin and brittle. "I think you and I need to have a little chat." Sophia turned, startled by the tone, but didn't respond immediately. There was an unease in the air between them, a tension that was impossible to ignore. She had learned long ago to read people, to understand when something wasn't quite right. And Rachel's presence felt like a storm on the horizon. "I see what's happening here," Rachel continued, her eyes narrowing. "David has taken a liking to you, and I get it. He's a good man, and you're a story, a good cause. But that's all you are to him, isn't it? A fleeting moment of charity, a way for him to feel better about himself." Sophia's chest tightened, but she refused to let Rachel see how much the words stung. She was used to being looked down upon, used to being underestimated. But Rachel's cruel insinuations still found their mark. Rachel took a step closer, lowering her voice so only Sophia could hear. "I can help you, I can make all of this go away. You don't have to keep pretending. I can give you money, a lot of it. Enough to make sure you never have to worry about living on the street again. All you have to do is step away. Walk away from David. He'll forget about you in no time. All of this," she gestured vaguely, "will be over. It's really that simple." Sophia froze. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the offer. It was the same old game she'd seen countless times, but this time it felt different. She had worked so hard to survive, to stand on her own, to rise above the hand life had dealt her. But now, Rachel was offering her the very thing she'd always refused, a way out that came with a price. The weight of Rachel's words pressed down on Sophia's chest, making it harder to breathe. She had lived her life without relying on charity, without accepting pity, and yet now, here was Rachel, dangling money in front of her, trying to buy her out of David's life. But what was the cost? Her dignity, her sense of self-worth? Sophia opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, a voice rang out, clear and determined. "No." David appeared, stepping into the space between them like a shield, his expression hard but unwavering. He had been watching from a distance, unable to ignore the venom in Rachel's voice, the way she had tried to manipulate Sophia. It was enough. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and her lips twisted into a sneer. "What is this, David? You're going to defend her now? After everything we've been through? She's nothing but a homeless girl. She's not even your equal." David stood tall, unflinching in the face of her harsh words. "You've crossed the line, Rachel," he said, his voice calm but full of authority. "Sophia is not a charity case. She's a person, and she deserves more than your money and your manipulation." Sophia's heart swelled in that moment, though a flood of emotions crashed over her. She had never had anyone stand up for her like this, had never known what it felt like to have someone defend her so fiercely. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was respect. Real respect. And David wasn't just offering her his support. He was giving her something more important than anything Rachel could offer. He was giving her the chance to stand on her own, beside him, as an equal. Rachel's face turned crimson, her usual control slipping away as she tried to regain her composure. "You don't understand, do you? You're just a fool. You'll regret this." David didn't flinch. "Maybe you're the fool for thinking that people can be bought? You think that money can solve everything? You think it's the answer to every problem? I'm not playing that game anymore, Rachel. Not with you. And certainly not with Sophia." Sophia's heart raced as she watched the exchange. The world around her seemed to shrink, leaving only David and Rachel locked in this battle of wills. But in that moment, all the doubts, all the fears, faded away. David had chosen her. Not because of pity, not because he was trying to save her, but because he saw her, truly saw her. Don't ever speak to her like that again, David added, his voice firm. And don't ever think you can use your wealth or your manipulations to control me or anyone else. With that, David turned to Sophia, his gaze softening as he reached for her hand. Come on, he said quietly, as if the world had been weighing on them both, and now, finally, it was time to breathe. Let's get out of here. Sophia stood there, her hand in his, feeling a surge of emotion so strong it threatened to overwhelm her. In that moment, she knew that David didn't see her as a project. He didn't see her as something to fix or save. He saw her as a woman worthy of love and respect, worthy of a future. And as they walked away, Rachel's angry words fading into the distance, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just the promise of love or a life without fear that moved her. It was the realization that she was no longer invisible. She mattered, and for the first time in her life, she believed that someone truly saw her. David had made a stand for her, and in doing so, he had given her something more powerful than anything money could ever buy, her own sense of worth. The cool evening air wrapped around them like a gentle embrace as David and Sophia walked away from the chaos, the tension of the night beginning to settle into the past. The lights of the city, once so vibrant and overwhelming, now seemed distant and muted, almost as if they, too, were giving the two of them the space to breathe, to process everything that had transpired. Sophia walked beside David, her heart still pounding from the confrontation with Rachel, from the weight of the words that had been exchanged. But there was something else in her chest now, a quiet stirring of something far more powerful than fear or uncertainty, something that had been dormant for so long, buried beneath layers of hardship and survival. It was hope. It was trust. And it was a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now, love. David was silent beside her, his presence steady, comforting, and as the distance between them and the world around them grew, the walls that had once divided them began to crumble. The uncertainty that had clouded Sophia's mind for so long started to dissipate. And as they reached the quiet of a secluded garden near the edge of the city, David finally stopped, turning to face her. Sophia looked up at him, her heart racing, unsure of what he was thinking, but knowing deep down that whatever was about to happen would change everything. David's eyes, usually so guarded, were now open and raw, as if he were allowing her to peer into the depths of his soul. Sophia, he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, yet carrying the weight of something real, something profound. I've spent so much of my life trying to hold on to things, trying to fix everything, trying to control everything. But the truth is, I've never felt more lost than when I was chasing something that wasn't meant for me. I've been holding on to Rachel for too long, trying to make it work, and in doing so, I almost missed what was right in front of me. He paused, taking a breath, his eyes searching hers for something. A confirmation, perhaps, that she was still with him in this moment. Sophia's throat tightened, her pulse quickening, but she held his gaze, feeling a strange warmth flooding her chest, the kind that comes when someone's honesty cuts through the noise and the confusion. I never expected to find someone like you, David continued, his voice full of emotion. But here you are. And in the time I've known you, I've learned more about myself than I ever thought possible, about what really matters, and about what it means to truly love someone, not because of what they can give you, but because of who they are. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She had never been seen like this, never been cherished for the simple, messy truth of who she was. Her whole life had been a series of surviving, of fighting to be acknowledged, to be accepted, but never truly loved for herself. And yet, here was David, standing before her, offering her something she had never allowed herself to believe in. I know I'm not perfect, David said, his voice thick with sincerity. But I want to be better for you. I want to be the man you deserve, the man who will stand by you, fight for you, and never let you doubt your worth. I want to make this right. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Sophia. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she took in his words, the gravity of what he was saying washing over her. This wasn't about the money he had or the life he could offer her. It wasn't about charity or pity. It was about something deeper, something she had long feared she would never find. It was love, real love. David reached into his pocket and pulled out the same ring he had once offered Rachel, the one he had kept all this time, now symbolizing something entirely different. He held it out to her, his hand steady, his heart open. "Sophia, will you marry me? Not because of anything I have or can give you, but because of who we are together. Will you let me spend my life making you feel as seen, as cherished, as you make me feel?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat, her heart trembling in her chest. This was it. The moment she had once thought was out of reach, when someone would love her for who she truly was, not for what she could provide, but simply for her heart, was standing before her. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Tears blurred her vision as she reached out to take his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at the ring, then back at David. And something inside her shifted, something that had been locked away for so long. Hope, belief, love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, David, I'll marry you." The words, so simple but so powerful, sent a surge of joy through both of them. David's eyes lit up with a warmth that filled the space between them, and without another word, he took her into his arms, lifting her gently off the ground as they embraced. It was as if the world had finally fallen into place, as if everything they had gone through, the struggles, the heartache, the doubts, had led this moment. The moment where they would no longer be held back by their pasts, by the scars that life had left on them, but would instead step forward together into a future filled with possibility. As they pulled apart, David smiled, his hand resting gently on her cheek. "I love you, Sophia, with all my heart." Sophia smiled back, her eyes shining with the realization of how far she had come. "I love you too, David," she said softly. "And for the first time, I believe that love is worth fighting for." They stood there for a moment, simply holding each other, the night around them quiet and peaceful, the sounds of the city fading into the background. It was a new beginning, one where they would fight together, side by side, for the love they had found and for the future they would build together. And as they walked hand in hand into the night, with the promise of a new life ahead of them, Sophia knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, love really is worth the fight. As the days passed, Sophia's life began to unfold in ways she had never imagined. The hustle and struggle for survival, the cold nights spent alone, the hunger, the rejection. Each of those moments felt like a distant memory now, fading into the past, replaced by something far more powerful and enduring. She would often find herself waking up in the warmth of a cozy bed, the sunlight filtering through the windows, casting a soft glow on the room she now shared with David. It was a stark contrast to the harshness of the streets, where she had once begged for scraps and fought to hold on to her dignity. But now, that fight was different. It wasn't about survival. It was about thriving, about building something beautiful with the man who had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else had. Sophia sat by the window one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Her heart swelled with gratitude as she thought back to how far she had come. The girl who had once worn tattered clothes and walked with her head down, avoiding the gaze of others, was now standing tall in a life filled with love and respect. She had found something far more precious than wealth or material gain. She had found a love that was real, built on sincerity, kindness, and mutual understanding. As she gazed out at the world before her, she realized something profound. Love wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about appearances or grand gestures. Love, she now knew, was about how someone made you feel, the warmth they offered when the world felt cold, the encouragement they gave when you doubted yourself, and the unwavering support they showed when you needed it most. David had given her all of that. He had given her something more valuable than gold. He had given her a sense of worth, a belief that she was deserving of love and happiness, no matter where she came from. David, too, had changed, no longer burdened by the weight of past expectations or trying to hold on to something that was never meant to be. He had embraced a new chapter in his life. With Sophia by his side, he had discovered that love wasn't something to possess or control. It was something to nurture, to cherish, and to grow together. Together, they had built a foundation not on the things they could offer one another, but on the trust and respect they had cultivated, day by day, moment by moment. They had learned to fight for each other, not with grand gestures or extravagant displays, but with the quiet strength that came from knowing they were in this together, no matter what. And in that, they found a peace they had both longed for. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, laughing about something silly, Sophia took a deep breath and smiled, her heart full. She had always feared that love was something only for the lucky, the privileged. But now, she knew better. She had fought for this love, fought for herself, fought for her future, and fought for a chance to be loved as she was. And now, here she was, with a man who valued her not because of what she could give him, but simply because she was her. Hand in hand, David and Sophia were ready to face the world. Together, they had built a life that honored their pasts, but didn't allow them to define their future. They knew there would be challenges ahead, as there always were in life, but they were no longer afraid. They had found the strength in each other, a bond that was unbreakable. As they walked forward into their future, they knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. But with each step, they were leaving behind the shadows of their pasts, of rejection, of loneliness, of doubt, and embracing the bright, hopeful future they had created together. A future where love was the most important thing of all. And as Sophia looked at David, his hand firmly in hers, she realized that this was the greatest victory of all. Love had found her, not in the way she expected, but in the most beautiful and unexpected of ways, and she would never take it for granted. Their journey was just beginning, but they knew this for sure. As long as they had each other, they could face anything. Together, they would build a life rooted in love, respect, and the belief that no matter what, they would always fight for each other. Forever. And so, Sophia and David's journey continues, a journey built on love, hope, and the belief that no matter the hardships we face, we can always find a new beginning. They've learned that true love isn't about wealth, status, or material things, but about kindness, respect, and the willingness to fight for each other. Their story reminds us that love is worth the fight, no matter where we come from or what we've been through. Thank you so much for watching this heartfelt journey unfold. We hope it has inspired you as much as it has inspired us. If you've enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and what you think about Sophia and David's love story. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated on more stories like this. Your support means the world to us, and we'd love to continue sharing these beautiful moments with you. Thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to bringing you more stories that inspire and touch the heart. See you in the next video.